Previously on Crime Adjacent. Ralph Tierney opened Ralph's Gun and Gear on Main Street in early December 1995. He leased the storefront in August of that year with one goal in mind: to open by Thanksgiving to capitalize on the holiday shopping season. Ralph is an incredibly short man, barely reaching 5 feet or so, even with lifts, but his gentle, charismatic personality practically fills the room. He told me in an interview, "It was a lot slower than I imagined. I thought I would get a big boost for gifts and such, at least for the fishing gear, but it was like pulling teeth to get people into the store, let alone to buy something. I began wondering what the hell I had gotten myself into and how I was going to pay back all my loans." Ralph sold everything from fishing equipment to handguns and rifles and BB guns. He said the store was practically empty before Christmas and then a ghost town afterwards. That all changed on Sunday afternoon, January 21st, 1996. That was the day Bobby Briggs was discovered in the valley. That was when Ralph first noticed a change in the store and around town in general. I interviewed him in 2023 when I arrived back in town. He leaned against a glass cabinet filled with hunting knives and rifle scopes. He was missing 2 fingers on each hand, trigger fingers. He saw me glance and said, "Born that way, not some dumbass accident if you're wondering." Honestly, I was. Ralph pointed a pinky finger at a brass bell dangling from the front door. He said, "That little thing began to ring by 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and by evening, I decided to just keep the place open all night if need be. I couldn't get people to go away." Ralph finally closed the store close to midnight, and by the following morning, Monday, there was a line outside by the time he arrived to open the store for the day. People in line held up a newspaper and passed copies around, whispering and gossiping. Ralph said he'll never forget it, the sound of his doorbell clanging and chiming all day and into the night. A tide of people flooded into his store. They demanded guns and rifles, growing angry at the mandatory state waiting period. This was an emergency, they yelled. They wanted guns, now. He had never seen anything like it. Ralph filled out form after form, promising people they could return for their weapons once background checks and the waiting periods were done. In the meantime, people grabbed air guns and BB guns and paintball guns, whatever they could find. Then he moved on to bows and arrows, hunting knives, canoe oars. Ralph showed people how to wield collapsible fishing rods as batons. He said, "I'll never forget the look in their eyes, just sheer panic. And they all said the same thing over and over again. The rest stop killer, the rest stop killer, the rest stop killer. I can't get it out of my mind." By the end of that weekend, it was official. A clear pattern had emerged. There was a killer out there, but he wasn't just at Hunter Hill Rest Stop in Vallejo. He was in Ridgewood. And every other weekend, he abducted another man and stomped him to death in a valley on the outskirts of town. After Bobby Briggs was found that Sunday, it was like a hidden timer went off all throughout town. A countdown had begun. 2 weeks. Ridgewood had 2 weeks to prepare itself, because anyone could be next. Here's the story. But first, special thanks to Melissa S. in Tampa for the tip on Zippy. I've changed Melissa's name here, but they know who they are. We've lost contact with Melissa, but if you're listening, I assure you, Nikki is looking into it. We appreciate the tip, and we have forwarded it to the proper authorities there. But please, write back. Let us know you're okay. We've tried everything at this point. And as for the rest of you, I really need to repeat this. Please, let Nikki handle this. We deeply appreciate your help and desire to catch this guy. But again, don't approach. Your safety is more important than anything. For all other matters, you can follow along with these cases and access behind-the-scenes information at our Patreon page, where you can also join our monthly true crime and criminal profiling reading group, where we explore the show's big issues together. Let's go deep or go home, together. I'm here for it. From San Francisco, this is Crime Adjacent, the never-ending true crime story told weekly. I'm Chase Patrick. Panic. We need to talk about panic. I'm really going to dig deep on widespread social panic here, because it gripped Ridgewood after Briggs was found, and the parallels between what happened in Ridgewood and what happens in towns all over the country when panic sets in. It's astonishing. Why does this happen? How? And why do we keep repeating the same patterns over and over again? Yes, you guessed it. It's nerd time. I'm not even apologizing this time. This is just wildly fascinating. Let's go. So, it all began in the early 60s with a young man from South Africa named Stan Cohen who moved to England. At first, he wanted to be a social worker there, helping the local teens. But he kept up his studies in sociology and criminology and would eventually turn in his PhD thesis called Hooligans, Vandals, and the Community, a study of social reaction to juvenile delinquency. I guarantee any fan of true crime has heard a lot about this thesis, because in 1972, he published it as a book, Folk Devils and Moral Panics. A better title, no doubt. A title that sells, a title you've probably heard before. Cohen coined the term moral panic to describe this interconnected relationship between something actually happening, a smaller event or a thing that somehow confounds the boundaries of, quote, normalcy in society, and then how a social consensus forms around this thing as an enemy, a folk devil that must be held to account and dealt with. He had been studying the mods and rockers in Britain, but any group that tests the quote-unquote boundaries of a normal society are subject to this panic and label. Hooligans, welfare queens, hordes of immigrants, trans folks, all outsiders either physically or psychically to social mores. But outsiders? To whom? Who gets to define what's normal and abnormal anyway? Who's inside and out? Cohen was part of a new school of sociology asking these very questions and helping to unravel all the tragic consequences that follow when these small groups get outsized attention as perceived threats. Interestingly, Cohen uses a schema for dealing with natural disasters for predicting how these moral panics spin out of control, as if we, humans, are as predictable in our panic as landslides or recurring storms. He said, a thing happens, a real thing, or a story of a thing, like a fight or a murder, and rumors and gossip burble up. A threat is formed. Mass media gets involved. Public officials, they amplify it. So everyday people talk about it more. And it gets amplified even more and more until all of the sensationalism and media and rumor coalesce into a collective psychic paranoia and panic. I needed to tell you this because this is what happens in true crime cases all the time, whether in England or Texarkana or Ridgewood. This process, this ebb and flow between rumor and official statements, is how the rest stop killer got his name. It's how so many killers get their name. But the thing is, no one is sure exactly who coined the name, or even exactly when. It just happened, almost out of the collective ether, sometime between the second and third murders, right between the two Bobbys. When the killer abducted Tommy Coulee from the Hunter Hill rest stop in Vallejo in December 1995, the rest stop killer moniker had not yet been created, that much is sure. There is no mention of it in the archive, the morgue, of the Ridgewood Recorder newspaper for all of 1995 or the first few weeks of 1996. The story had not yet gained any media attention outside of Ridgewood, certainly not to the extent it would rule the world in 2023. After all, at the time, Tommy's death was thought to be a horrifying one-off, a robbery gone wrong, a lover's quarrel. But 2 weeks later, when Bobby Calvin was taken from the same rest stop and brought back to the same lover's lane in the valley on the western edge of Ridgewood and murdered in the exact same manner as Tommy, something happened. People talked. It was the talk of the town. Rumors spread, gossip, jokes, conspiracies. Things spiraled. Then they took shape. Gossip became reality, and back again. Winnie Freeman and I dug through the newspaper archives later. Here's what we found. The Ridgewood Recorder published a letter to the editor from concerned citizen Marjorie Hollingsworth on January 18, 1996, urging town residents to not shrug off or make fun of local victims of the, quote, so-called rest stop killer just because they were gay. Honestly, good for you, Marjorie. People who see panics for what they are and aren't afraid to speak out on behalf of small, powerless groups are just never, ever looked back on poorly. I love to see it. From her letter, you get a sense she is recounting conversations she had gotten into around town about the killer, who seemed to have a name amongst the people, the so-called rest stop killer. This letter, as far as I can tell, is the first mention of the rest stop killer in any archive or public record. Later that day, Police Chief Frank Ricci, perhaps feeling some semblance of growing pressure, sought to reassure folks that there was no danger to Ridgewood and that police were, in fact, investigating as much as they could, extending, quote, every resource, although Officer Ida Jones had the same doubts as Marjorie at the time. Still, in a press release that same day, Ricci seemed to use Marjorie's term, calling the killer the rest stop killer for the first time in any official leadership capacity or official public statement. Winnie Freeman wrote a story about Ricci's press statement. The story appeared the next day, January 19th, 1996, headlined, Rest Stop Killer, No Threat to Ridgewood, police say. This phenomenon was like a cultural Ouroboros of panic creation. First, gossip emerged organically. Then police talked about it, officially, trying to calm nerves. And then the media wrote about this official statement, cementing everything into the public record, while at the same time reflecting back this originating organic gossip as truth and reality to the very people who just created the name out of thin air, on the sidewalk perhaps, or just shooting the bull over coffee at Mix's Diner. The rest stop killer. He's a thing now. Something with a name, a shape, a form. Something to be worried about. Something to fear. I need to take a detour here before I get back to Ridgewood and what happened in town, to the town, after Bobby Briggs was discovered. Because I've seen this before, or something remarkably similar at least. You might have too. In the movies. They made all these events into a hit horror film, as sometimes happens when true crime collides with fiction. It all happened in the late 1940s in Texarkana, right on the border of, well, Texas and Arkansas. There's two cities, actually, twin cities. Texarkana, Texas, and Texarkana, Arkansas. The point is, there, over the course of 10 weeks in 1946, from February to May, someone was killing young couples at lovers' lanes, at night, every 3 to 4 weeks. The killer just materialized, terrorized the community for a few months, and then disappeared. The case remains unsolved. It all began on February 22nd, 1946, when someone approached Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean LeRae, who were parked in a known lover's lane spot just outside of town. What happens next reads like the beginning of an urban legend, except this was real. A man in a white sack mask with cut-out holes to see through appeared from the darkness, a pistol in hand. It sounds an awful lot like the Zodiac, doesn't it, at Lake Berryessa? At first, the masked man told Jimmy to take off his pants. Maybe it was a robbery, maybe a twisted joke, but it wasn't either. The Texarkana Gazette reported that the attacker then beat Jimmy so severely that his skull fractured in 2 places. The man then turned to Mary Jean. He ordered her to run into the woods. This next part is strange. The killer then caught up to her and asked, why was she running? She told him, well, you told me to. The killer responded by calling her a liar and then assaulted her. Somehow, she survived. In fact, they both did. Jimmy said the suspect was young, tan, and white, while Mary Jean thought the attacker was black. Either way, the man got away. 4 weeks passed until the killer struck again, at another lover's lane. Both Richard Griffin and Polly-Ann Moore were shot in the back of the head. They were both found in their car, Richard in the front seat, Polly-Ann in the back. The killer apparently rifled through their pockets, like a robbery. Or maybe it was staged. Investigators couldn't tell. There was no motive, no witnesses, just a growing sense around the community, maybe 40,000 people at the time, that something bad was just beginning. Gossip swirled. Rumors. Indeed, 3 weeks later, on April 14th, 1946, the killer struck again, sometime between 1:30 and 6:30 a.m. The details of this one, they haunt me. I can't stop thinking about it. I've spoken before about the confluence of bad luck and bad timing and whether this has an effect on our everyday lives, on our very outcomes. But how about world events, whole continents away? What does this have to do with us? It reminds me of Susan's endless lectures about a guy named C. Wright Mills and his sociological imagination, and how we like to think we're all individual actors, making our own clear, rational choices, but how we're also caught up in the sweep and tide of history in the current moment we live in, and what this all does to the trajectory of our lives, our choices, our options, our outcomes. As a former Marine, it resonates. I, too, have been swept up in world events beyond my control. And then here, in Texarkana, it happens with a young girl. She's 15. She finds herself alone, late at night, with a killer on a desolate road, because there'd been a great big global war on different continents altogether, and that changed things, made this whole night possible for her. Here's what I mean. In 2016, the Texarkana Gazette wrote a retrospective of the unsolved case on the 70th anniversary of the murders, just like Winnie Freeman did every year in the Ridgewood Recorder. So, remember, this is 1946, just after World War II. The Gazette said there was a concert at the VFW that night, Saturday, April 13th, and there just weren't that many men around at the time, let alone male musicians. They were overseas. So the local band leader recruited 4 young girls and women for the concert, including an alto sax player by the name of Betty Jo Booker. She was an only teen, a popular kid, a scholar, musician, a former Little Miss Texarkana, according to the Gazette. And this was a big dance, a big deal. I can imagine how thrilled she must have been up there with her girlfriends, on stage, just rocking out with her sax. So Saturday rolls into Sunday morning. They're jamming, but it's getting late. The crowd's dying out. At 1:30 a.m., this is April 14th now, she gets a ride from friend Paul Martin. They're supposed to go to a slumber party. Instead, they find their way out to Spring Lake Park, a lover's lane spot. We're not exactly sure what happened. Paul's car was found there, but his body was discovered 3 miles away. He'd been shot. They couldn't find Betty Jo, however. Not with Paul, not at the car. A search party was formed, and a few hours later, at 11:30 a.m., Betty Jo was found about 2 miles away in a different direction altogether, according to the Gazette. She'd also been shot. Evidence from the scene indicated both teens put up a fight. But I wonder, did Betty Jo try to escape, to run away? Or did the killer make her run and then caught up to her, just like he did a few weeks ago with Mary Jean? Like I said, we're not exactly sure what happened. What we do know is this. They found Betty Jo behind a tree. She was fully clothed, her right hand in the pocket of her overcoat, and the other hand still clutching her saxophone case. The next and last murder happened 3 weeks later, May 3rd, 1946. This one was similar and remarkably different at the same time, in the same way Bobby Briggs' murder was similar but different. These last murders and noticeable differences would light each town on fire 50 years apart in an entire country away from each other. It all happened at the isolated farmhouse of Virgil and Katie Starks. This was an older married couple. They're at home, listening to the radio, just a regular Friday night. And then, out of nowhere, a shot rang out. Virgil was shot in the back of the head by someone firing through the window. Katie ran, but the killer chased her down, shooting her twice in the face. As reported in the Dallas Morning News on May 5th, 1946, she somehow, miraculously, survived, staggering to a neighbor's house, covered in blood, screaming, "He's still out there." By this point, the town had already been gripped by fear. They already had a series of attacks and murders late at night before the Starks shooting. Parents had already set curfews, told their kids to stay inside. Businesses had closed. The streets emptied out at night. Phone calls came into the police and to the newspaper. Fingers pointed everywhere, to strangers, to friends, to family. But when the Starks were shot, in their own home, not out on the streets, this is when the town exploded. This is what I want to get at. These murders became known as the Texarkana Moonlight Murders, And the killer has been called a whole manner of different names, usually depending on which newspaper at the time was reporting the story. The Phantom Slayer, the Phantom Killer, the Phantom of Texarkana. They even made a horror movie about it in 1976, The Town That Dreaded Sundown. Over those 10 weeks, the killer struck every third or fourth weekend, sometimes Friday, sometimes late Saturday night. He attacked a total of 8 people, killing 5. True Crime All the Time podcast did an amazing 2-part deep dive into this case a few years back, as did Last Podcast on the Left, Going West, Criminology, and too many others to count. Like I said, as more and more murders happened, the panic only grew, but especially after the Starks were shot. Anyone could be a target at this point, in their own homes. The Texas Rangers were called in. Armed vigilante groups tried to lure the killer out by posing as kids out for the night on lonely roads. Homes that once welcomed neighbors with open doors were now fortified. Locks previously deemed unnecessary became essential. Firearms flew off the shelves as citizens armed themselves, preparing for an unknown enemy. At one point, according to True Crime All the Time, a police captain went on the radio and told people to oil up their guns and rifles. People warily approach their friends' homes now, announcing themselves as not the killer. Police had to do the same. The sense of security in Texarkana was replaced by a suffocating blanket of fear. The streets, once lively at sunset, became eerily silent, desolate. The fear wasn't confined to Texarkana alone. Nearby towns like Hope, Lufkin, and Magnolia also felt the ripple effects. Reports of prowlers flooded police stations, though many were chalked up to heightened imaginations. The lack of concrete leads only fueled the growing paranoia. Who was out on the roads, watching cars? Who was in the woods, watching homes? Who was next? Remember when I told you about how the rest stop killer was named? In this organic ebb and flow between public and official outlets, like the police and the newspaper. Something similar happened here. Again, go listen to True Crime All the Time dive into this case. It's remarkable. After the first attack, the killer didn't have a name yet. It was just a random one-off event, like Tommy, and it didn't actually end in murder. But after the second attack, when Betty Jo and Paul were killed, the Texarkana Daily News printed a story about the Phantom Killer. The day after that, the Gazette joined in with a story about the Phantom Slayer. Now the killer had a shape, a mysterious, elusive one, a phantom. He was out there. And then, nothing. A few days went by after the Stark shooting, and nothing happened. A week, another week, a month, and then another month, and on into years and years. They did have suspects, most notably a resident named Yule Sweeney, who was known for repeated crimes like counterfeiting and car theft. His wife actually fingered him as the prime suspect, but he also made enough odd statements that he stood out. Another man, a university student, was alleged to have confessed and then died by suicide. An escaped German prisoner of war was also looked at, a real outsider for sure. Who else could do this but an outsider? That's a recurring theme in cases like this. But police never had enough to charge anyone. The case remains unsolved. The killer, unidentified. Eventually, slowly, the Texas Rangers pulled out. Police kept investigating, of course, but with no more murders, the panic eased, and so did the curfews. Slowly, a sense of normalcy returned. Life moved on, just like it eventually would in Ridgewood. These panics, they happen a lot, everywhere, throughout time, all the time, even today. Crime Reads details the story of several panics, strange ones. The London monster of the 1790s would go around pricking or stabbing women, sometimes with what felt like hat pins and sometimes knives and razor blades. He was thought to strap razor blades to his knees, sidling up to women and sticking them. More than 50 women. Panic ensued. Everyone was on the lookout. They varied their routines. The Lore podcast tells the story of Spring-Heeled Jack, who emerged in England in the 1830s and is thought to exist even today. A clawed, ghostly figure who attacked women and now haunts, still scaring people at night. The Salem women trials, War of the Worlds, the radio broadcast fiction that seemed real enough to send people into the streets, panicked about an alien invasion? How? How does this happen? Why are we so prone to panic over phantoms? I can't help but think, does this very podcast, does true crime in general, inflate the risk factors beyond their actual likelihoods of occurrence, playing its role as mass media amplifier on a folk devil? Crime everywhere, threats all around us, killers, rapists, traffickers everywhere all the time, in your ears while doing dishes, in your car while on your commute. Be afraid, be wary, someone is out there right now ready to take you. Actual crime statistics show crime is going down. Radford University's open source file on serial killers show they are decreasing. The FBI says serial killers account for less than 1% of all murders. And yet, at the same time, I can't blame these people in these towns, because something is indeed happening. Real events, real attacks, and real murders. Son of Sam was actually out there. The Zodiac, Jack the Ripper, BTK, Israel Keys, the Zip Tie Killer, the Rest Stop Killer, the Texarkana Phantom. They are actually out there. Do you just ignore it? Maybe you don't have to fall into a full-fledged panic, but honestly, I get the impulse. Better to be prepared than dead. I don't have an easy answer. There's no neat bow coming, tying everything together. This is life. This is true crime. We want closure and answers, but far too often we're left with so much gray. I can't wait to chat about this on the Patreon page or in the reading group. Go deep or go home. Let me know your thoughts. I guess, on a larger scale, if you're reading about a particular group, especially according to Cohen, a small group with little social power, being villainized just over and over and over again in the media, and it begins to feel like an oversized reaction to a problem that's not really a problem at all, like, say, trans folks just trying to pee in peace, maybe we can see it as moral panic and development and let it go. But what if someone's out there, taking your neighbors, stomping them to death in a valley on the outskirts of town, or creeping through your neighbor's window at night, or stabbing your friends out by Lover's Lane? I mean, I get it. I'd be scared too. I might panic. This is exactly what happened in Ridgewood in 1996. Next time on Crime Adjacent. By the time news broke about Briggs, a pattern had developed and came into clear focus for everyone. Every 2 weeks, the killer struck. Always on a Saturday night. Always in the valley, at least eventually. He didn't strike in the valley, but he always wound up there with a new body to dump. Tommy Coulee, Bobby Calvin, Bobby Briggs. 3 men, each one taken on a Saturday night, spaced exactly 14 days apart. This meant all eyes were on the next Saturday, February 3rd, 1996, the next date in the cycle. Cops set up perimeters. They roamed the desolate streets with shotguns. One man made a homemade flamethrower and took it upon himself to roam the sewer systems. No joke. A group of women from the local church formed a vigilante posse that, in the end, seemed to cause more harm than good. Ridgewood, population 10,000, lost its absolute mind. If you like these stories, remember to review and like Crime Adjacent wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to check out our social media channels and our Patreon page at patreon.com/crimeadjacent to find out more about our true crime and criminal profiling reading group. Until next time, this is Chase Patrick from San Francisco with a reminder, stay tuned. You'll never unhear what happens next.